this body of work has been created just the last 18 months, which certainly has been a very unique time on the collective and personal level. This being said, my intent with the work has always been to reach a certain level of emotional resonance. I am not interested in the entertainment side of art. I'm not interested in narrative. Found myself referring perhaps more to art history discreetly. Like in this particular painting, it has that real sense of almost like a Monet type of water surface, okay? The title of the painting came afterwards, as they usually do. I spent a lot of time, in my childhood in the Mediterranean, so these colors and the light is pretty much etched in my DNA. And Anafe is a small island in the Cyclade. And to me, that name was just, there's a certain poetry to it. But also, if you look at the Greek mythology, Apollo was the one who created that island out of his bow as a shelter for the Argonauts, to protect them from an upcoming storm. So there's a sense of the painting or art as a shelter, as something that can envelops you, a place where one can find a deep reverie and connection to something greater than ourselves. In this particular painting, there is a sense of space, okay, opening up. It's really, even though it has references to paintings of the Annunciations, for example, especially in the colors that are directly lifted, those greens and the cobalt and gold, directly lifted from Van de Weyden, for example, which for me connects to my own personal history, but also with the entire history of printing per se. Now, at the end of the day, I think a lot of the work, what's going on in the work has to do with just light. There's something about New Mexico light, certainly. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that's basically the subject of as painter's subject. How do you deal with light? How do you distill the landscape to just its emotional resonance? It's like painting air in some ways. In Anafe and in several of the paintings, I've used those vertical and horizontal elements, which have been present in the work in a long time, but they are becoming perhaps a little more assertive and prevalent, in the paintings. And if I think about, for example, how Mondrian spoke very eloquently about the vertical and the horizontal, and how everything in life basically align itself along those directions. And in the Japanese tradition, again, the vertical is the vertical being the human body, being the link between heaven and earth. And on some level, none of it is direct, in the work, but it's a way for me to organize my mind, perhaps. I needed that kind of structure. This particular piece evolved really slowly. There's a lot going on in the surface that start to like breathe in many different ways. And it has a sense of more of a cosmic connection just because of the tonalities of the piece itself, those rich burgundies and blues and silvers, woven within the surface in a very, very subtle and articulated way. Now, Shakti, the title itself, obviously, is creative energy. Okay, so that's without being too descriptive, but that's really where where I want it to exist. And I was mentioning earlier that the painting have a sense of having created themselves. They've always been here. You know, I'm just sort of the link in between, but I really feel like they have a way of connecting to the different natural element, the wind especially, and sound in some ways, almost like the sound of space. So this painting here, Angel, it has a sense of real shimmering light. I use silence almost as a material. You know, the paintings exist in their own silence, but there's something real physical about it. They have a very strong mass to it. I spent I spent a lot of time uh, in my life, you know, underwater. I'm a diver, and I spend a lot of time in the ocean. And I think that sensation of being moved around, you know, almost in the amniotic world, kind of percolates through the paintings. Here has that sort of arabesque, you know, running through, in the sense of it starting to move like this, also almost like in a sculptural fashion. In particular, in that painting, I've almost like sort of destabilized the monochrome. I work within a very restricted palette, you know, in some ways, and yet I want to distill every single one to its, you know, infinite possibility. And I think this painting in particular, you know, has a lot of grays and mauves and very, very subtle tonalities, which kept me invested, kept me interested. You know, as a painter, I think about that all the time. You know, how those tones interact and how those material, you know, built on one another. And so that is Angel. I strongly believe that painting, especially abstract painting for me, which keeps things more open, um, can truly bring you to a sense of deep joy, for lack of a better word. And it can really, if you allow it to do its job and to really spend time with each piece of art, it can bring you to a sense of profound joy. Yeah, I'm not sure how else to say it. I think there is a spiritual connection, and that's a word that I don't use very often for the, you know, iffy connections. However, I think that's how I situate my practice, as that connection, you know, between the cosmos and our place in the environment.